Back. So we had some interesting discussion on the last video we put up about these three different pair of pliers, and we were kind of speculating as to why we might have such a low torque rating on the Icon. A good point was brought up that maybe the Icon was hitting something in the vice jaw, which was dispersing the force a little bit differently due to the high amount of flex that appeared to be in that pliers. So, after much playing around, I think I have a good consistent way of getting some measurements here. Now, I originally thought that maybe I would go vertical with the pliers, and that way I could go between our two load cells and get something, but if the load cells twist, they're not meant for axial loading. So that really throws them off, and with handles like this, that doesn't really help us out. The handles tend to bend the load cells. Now, I don't think we're necessarily going to damage anything, it just throws off our readings. So I did some more work to the load cell vise to try and dampen that a little bit, and I took care of a hole that was in the jaws from the fasteners to hold it together. We filled it with some plastic so that the rubber grips or the handles are going to have continuous surface area to work with. So we still have our load cell here. We're going to have that on camera, and we'll see you over at the load cell vise. And we're back. We're over at the load cell vise. Now, since we last saw the load cell vise, we did some modifications. I noticed that the load cells weren't properly seated on the vise jaw itself, so did a little bit of changing here, got them down inside there really well. And I also noticed that our bolt for the jaw, you can see here we had a bunch of basically a gap in it so we could get the nut in. So we filled that in with plastic on both sides so we're smooth. And with doing experiments on this, I realized that I actually disconnected this load cell. We'll probably be doing something with switching on that at some point, but only this load cell is currently hooked up. And I noticed what was happening was, if we pushed in here, this one naturally wanted to come out, which had a negative value. So this positive value and that negative value created, it summed. So they were going against each other. So what we ended up doing, after playing around with this quite a bit, is I figured out that I could squeeze, if I squeeze this, I can get into the 500s. So I decided to look for a number that was in the 500s, and then for this we just have to get this at an angle so that this point is right on the load cell. And as we tighten this, we came to the number of 75. So let me tighten this up. We're going to first get it to 5. We're going to start at 5. And we're going to do two things. We barely have any tension on that. But we're going to do two things at 5. So we have contact here. We're going to take a measurement. We're at 2 3/4 and 42-ish. So I'm going to make a note of that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start tightening this to 75. And we're going to see how much force we have. So it wants to have a little bit, it's a little quirky to get it set in here, but as long as we have all of the force exerted at the load cell, we're going to get a pretty accurate reading. So we should get somewhere around 500 at 75. I've been able to repeat this quite a few times. I'm pretty confident with what we're doing, and we've tried it with a few of the different models. So we are at 75. We're right at 520. We are right at 2 inches. So we shrunk 3/4 of an inch. That's how much our handles compressed to get to 75. And you'll see that it kind of keeps going, but if I turn this up to 75, we didn't gain a whole lot over here. So this is not kilograms. I'm not sure exactly what this is, but I'm pretty confident it is not kilograms, because I'm not going to be able to squeeze 75 kilograms to get that 500 that we saw. So we're just going to roll with 75. That's just going to be a number that we're going to just take everything to, and it'll be an arbitrary number on our load cell vise. And we can still go into the 500s by hand. So we'll go with that for now. Now we'll go back to our Klein, and we'll put it right here. Put it at an angle that it will have force on the load cell. And we want to go to 5. Okay, so 5. We're right about 50. And let's call that 2. I'd say it's a 2 11/16. So now we'll get that set in here so that we know. That's the biggest thing. As long as we don't get the rest of this in contact with the jaw and we're pushing straight on the vise. So it's a little bit of a dance. You got to get it just right in here. There we go. That ought to get it. So we're going to go up to our 75. And this pair of pliers is very, very similar to the Knipex, actually. So we get up to 75 here. Try and keep everything from sliding. But this actually might have slightly more force than the Knipex. It's going to want to keep settling down. But there we are. A little bit more force. Now that actually makes sense because the jaw is longer on this pair. So let's just get that. So we're close to 560. So a little bit more force than the Knipex. Now the interesting one is going to be, how much did we shrink? This almost went an entire inch. We're like right at 1. We're right at 1 11/16. So this actually shrunk an inch. That's pretty. It's a lot of flex. So a little bit more flex. The Knipex went 3/4. The Klein went an inch. Now the interesting thing that we're going to get into here is the icon. Let's reset everything here. Sometimes this doesn't spring back properly, so we'll just reset it. Now the icon. I have done the icon a few times as well, and it is interesting. So let's get it set so that it is having all of its force applied Okay, so we're 5 and say 50-ish, and let's get a measurement here. We're right at 3 1/16. Okay, let's see what we can do, what we get when we get to 75. So now we don't have this part of the handle touching the vise. We're only pushing directly on the load cell itself. I overshot it. It should settle in. So we are looking like we're at 382, hovering around the 75. We're right at 2 3/8. So you can see this just wants to fall off. I'm not sure why, if it's the jaw of the vise going or if it's everything settling. As we mentioned before, one of the commenters thought maybe if we take and cut off the foam. I don't think so, because that might be some of what we're seeing here is the foam compressing. The foam is still going to only compress to a point. This magic number 75 is this number 75. The foam will compress and do its thing. Either the foam will compress or it won't. So I don't think cutting the foam off is going to change our reading, other than we would have maybe less of this spongy thing going on here. But I don't really feel like it's skewing our numbers a whole lot. That I can crank on this and you don't see, just there I got to 383. So it doesn't change the number all that much. This does not have as much of a mechanical advantage as the Klein. So interestingly, the Chinesium Klein actually has the highest jaw force on what we're testing here. So there we go. We've refined how we test these, and interesting results. The Klein actually performs a little better than the Knipex, but I don't know if I'm super surprised with that. Some of my working theory is the size of this key has something to do with the leverage that you get out of the pliers, and this is smaller than the Knipex. If we look, this is about quarter, and that is probably a 1/16 bigger, so probably very close to 5/16. This one also 5/16. I don't know for sure, but I'm just wondering if that has something to do with it. These also have a longer jaw, so by us putting our tool right at the end of the travel, this does have more leverage because we're out at the end. Handles length, everything pretty much all the same. In fact, the Knipex actually has a little bit on the Klein, but Klein actually has the highest when we test this way. Now it's within 40 kilograms, so it's not a significant difference. This is still a much higher quality tool, but now that we have a repeatable means of testing, we can get into a few other styles of these pliers. We can get into these Klein, USA made, not Chinese made, and we'll see what kind of numbers we can get out of them. And to go with that theme, we picked up a Hazit. We could see how these do. We got a few others that we can get into and see exactly how they test out. So I think we have our criteria all put together now on how we're going to test these tools. We have a format, and I think we can go through and kind of get some apples and apples measurements. This has been very repeatable. I'm always within the same range with the numbers. I was doing some logging here. We're pretty consistent with everything that we've tried. So that makes me feel pretty good about how we're doing the test. This number still not very good for the icon. So we weren't far off on how we were testing before. It just, these do not have a very good mechanical leverage on the workpiece. These are going to have better engagement. I'm pretty surprised with these cheap Chinese Klein, but we only have 3 points of data so far. So we'll keep digging into these and see which ones stack up. Let me know your thoughts below. I think we're pretty good on how we're testing now. Like I said, it's very repeatable. We're not getting engagement further down the handle because we're all the way at the end. We're putting all of our force on the one load cell. I took the other one out of the circuit. So I think we're pretty good. At least we got something consistent that we can compare with, and the numbers will be the numbers. I can also get to the numbers by hand, though I don't want to do it over and over. These just aren't quite what they used to be. Don't want to do any damage and regret it later. So, as always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.